Good morning and welcome to the November 17th, 2022 meeting of the DC Historic Preservation Review Board. My name is Marnique Heath, the chair of the board. Public notice of this WebEx meeting and participation instructions have been emailed to the project applicants and the HPO mailing list and also posted on the Office of Planning website. The meeting is live streamed and archived on the Office of Planning's YouTube channel. Please be aware that if you're watching on YouTube, you will not be able to provide testimony. Those wishing to provide testimony must register in advance and join via WebEx. I want to now ask each board member who's participating in the hearing to turn on their cameras, and I will do a roll call to signify who's present. Board Member Auerbach.
Good morning. Board Member Auerbach is present.
Good morning. Is Board Member Beatty on? I don't see her yet, but I do expect her. So we'll announce when she does arrive. Board Member Bell.
Good morning, Matt Bell, present.
Good morning. Procedural points. The camera function has been enabled for presenters and board members. At the beginning of each case, cameras can be turned off so that the focus is on the presentation slides. When cameras are off, you'll need to identify yourselves so that the court reporter knows who's speaking. I'll first ask HPO staff to present their report and evaluation of the case. Then I'll turn to the applicant to present their project plans. HPO has preloaded the plans into the set of slides that we'll see, and they will advance the slides upon request. Following the applicant's presentation, we'll hear testimony from ANCs, community groups, and individuals who have registered to speak. The camera function is not available for those who are providing testimony. After all testimony has been presented and the board is ready to ask questions and deliberate, I'll ask board members, staff, and presenters to turn on their cameras. After the board has finished deliberating and taken a vote on the project, cameras can then be turned off for the next presentation. In accordance with the ANC Act, the Historic Preservation Review Board is committed to giving careful consideration to the community and ANC comments that we receive. Our regulations require us to give great weight to properly adopted written recommendations of ANCs in the matters that come before us. To ensure great weight is given, the board discusses and addresses each issue or concern raised in ANC resolutions as a part of our deliberation and includes that discussion in the public record of the case as recorded in the live videos of our meetings. Following the meeting on the board's behalf, HPO archives the video recordings on the HPO website, keeping them accessible to the public. They prepare a written summary of the board's actions, which also includes a report of our findings and conclusions and any issues and concerns raised in ANC resolutions, articulating with particularity and precision our reasons why the ANC did or did not offer persuasive advice. And then they post the written record on the HPO website 1 week following the meeting, keeping it permanently accessible to the public. We have a few cases on our consent calendar this morning, and we did receive a late ANC notice in support of 3617 Newark Street Northwest that has now been added to the box file and is accessible to all. We had two cases, as you can see on our calendar, that have been deferred upon the applicants and the ANC's request. Of the cases that remain, are there questions or comments?
Yes, Chair Heath, I have a question on consent calendar item B, the Grace Reformed Church. When I looked at the PDF, I think I can figure out from the description and the narrative, but when I look at the PDF that's submitted, it's difficult to tell really how the properties are legally being subdivided. And so I'd ask that the staff get from the applicant something more legally definitive than the pencil rendering and the photographs that we have. We have photographs of the interior of the church and the church itself, but I think there should be something more specific on record with this decision to subdivide the properties and the landmark.
Okay, all right. We can add that to the request or any motion that would be made. Is that your only comment?
I do have one brief comment on item C in Anacostia Historic District. I didn't see in the box where the revised drawings were provided, but as described in the staff report, I'm comfortable with approving the request.
Okay. All right, and I do see that Board Member Beatty was able to get on. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Heath. I'm having some technical difficulties with my video, but I'm here.
Okay. All right, thanks for joining. Any other comments from board members on any cases on consent? All right, then I will make a motion that we approve the consent calendar with the comments added from Board Member Failer.
I'll second that.
Thanks. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Great, the motion carries. Before we proceed with our full agenda for the day, we have been asked by our council to convene an executive session. Does anyone have any issues with moving into executive session? All right, then we've been provided another dial-in for that session. If you can disconnect here, we'll reconvene for this meeting as soon as our executive session concludes. Thank you. Good morning. Board members are coming back to the meeting. And I think most are on now. And that we're ready to begin with the first case on our agenda this morning, which is a designation hearing of the Buchanan School Plaza. Staff ready to make your presentation?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. This is Todd Jones, HPO staff. I'm going to give a quick overview of the history of the site first, and then I'll move into the recommendations of the staff report. So this landmark nomination is for what today is called the Peter Bugg Shoe Academy and what was historically known as Buchanan School Plaza. The landmark will carry both names. The property is located at the corner of E and 13th Street Southeast next to the former Buchanan Elementary School and across the street from Watkins Elementary School in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. Next slide. The plaza's history begins in 1966 when First Lady Claudia Lady Bird Johnson first noticed the sad state of Buchanan Elementary School and its play area. The 70-year-old school had broken windows and its outdated play yard had cracked pavement interspersed with weeds. Next slide. The First Lady had made it her cause to beautify America's cities, which were then suffering from massive population loss. She had twin goals, one centered on improving urban aesthetics and another improving society itself. She would accomplish the first by planting flowers along major thoroughfares, creating pocket parks, and sprucing up the entryways to major cities. She would accomplish the second, the social mission, by cleaning up inner city schools and creating new urban parks and community gathering places. Beautification was about enticing visitors to come into the cities and about boosting the livability and local pride for those who already lived there. DC became the pilot city of Lady Bird Johnson's beautification program, and Buchanan Plaza became its first major inner city template. Next slide. The decision to pick Buchanan School was thanks mostly to the efforts of Walter Washington, who was then a beautification committee member and would soon become the first mayor of DC. He knew the city well and knew the areas most in need. He led the other members of the beautification committee on tours of DC and brought Buchanan to their attention. Next slide. Lady Bird Johnson wanted to build a new playground at Buchanan, but this would not just be any playground. It would be the template for all other inner city beautification projects to follow. It had to be inspirational, revolutionary, and iconic. It would need to be a community center useful to not only school children, but every neighborhood resident, and it would cost a fortune. Adjusted for today's for inflation, the final cost of Buchanan Plaza would be almost $3 million in today's money, well over double the typical cost of a 2022 DC school playground. Lucky for Lady Bird, Brooke Astor, the millionaire Manhattanite, was a member of the beautification committee, and her family's foundation paid for the majority of Buchanan Plaza. Astor's foundation had just recently paid for a new playground called Reese Plaza, which was built on the grounds of a public housing project in Lower Manhattan. Next slide. Reese Plaza became a design sensation, easily among the most influential playgrounds of the 20th century. It was featured on the cover of Time magazine and profiled in newspapers across the nation. Both the American Society of Landscape Architects and the American Institute of Architects bestowed upon it awards and praise. Part of the playground's appeal was its uniqueness. Traditional playgrounds of the 1960s looked just like traditional playgrounds from the 1930s. They had an arrangement of standardized stainless steel purpose-built play structures. Each piece had a clearly prescribed use with little room for imagination. The slide was for sliding, the swing was for swinging, and the seesaw was for seesawing. If you've ever observed a kid walking up a slide the wrong way, you know that children often see the limits of purpose-built play equipment as a challenge and as a rule to be broken. The creators of Reese Plaza took that observation and built the entire playground around it. Everything was open-ended. No piece of the playground had a single use. Children had the option of using concrete pyramids, stepping stones, climbing bars, and other versatile features for whatever purpose their imaginations desired. Best of all, there were no lines of children waiting to use play equipment intended for one child at a time. At Reese, teamwork was not just encouraged, but was almost a necessity. Next slide. Reese Plaza was known as an adventure-style playground. The concept had originated in Europe during World War II when the scarcity of metal made traditional playground equipment rare. Instead, adults created controlled environments where children could play with non-traditional items made from whatever was available, usually piles of brick and scraps of war. They were nicknamed junk playgrounds. From the child's perspective, it seemed like they were doing something against the rules, using things that only adults usually use, which made it even more appealing. From the parent's perspective, creating a supervised, controlled area of approved play items was a lot better than having kids play in the rubble piles of the streets. Those early adventure-style playgrounds gave kids a false sense of risk and let them challenge their imaginations. While there wasn't much else to use a seesaw for other than seesawing, the possibilities for a pile of bricks were almost endless. In the post-war years, adventure-style playgrounds became more planned and took further design inspiration from the 1930s playground concepts by modernist sculptor Isamu Noguchi. Piles of loose brick became concrete pyramids and climbing walls, but the general theories of open-ended play remained. Reese Plaza became one of the first and best realized adventure-style playgrounds in the United States. So when the time came to build a playground at Buchanan School, there was really only one way it could become inspirational, revolutionary, and iconic. It had to be adventure-style. Next slide. Brooke Astor and Lady Bird Johnson, they hired the exact design team behind Reese Plaza to plan Buchanan. In fact, in later years, one of the original Reese architects said that the facilities at Buchanan and Reese were, quote, almost identical. The design team had three main people. There was architect Simon Breens, a longtime advocate for pedestrian rights in New York City. There was sculptor William Tarr, a one-time magician who applied the whimsy of magic into his unusual concrete and skid steel sculptures. And there was landscape architect Paul Friedberg, the man most responsible for the playground design. Especially following Reese Plaza, Friedberg became one of America's most recognized and esteemed landscape architects. In 2015, he received the ASLA Medal, the highest honor to the American Society of Landscape Architects. To fulfill the social mission of being a community gathering place, Buchanan Plaza was designed with something for all ages, with specific zones dedicated to each. Next slide. For the child, there was the adventure-style playground itself. Everything was climbable, slidable, and playfully flexible. The features you see here, including the climbing cubes, were personally designed by Friedberg and were common elements in his other modernist adventure-style playground designs. Next slide. For the adult, there was a series of benches under shade structures and trees. The seating area pictured here was located under the Recreation Pavilion that now hosts the Peterbug Shoe Academy. Benches were also located along 13th Street. Next slide. For the teenager, there was a basketball court sunken below grade to negate the need for gates, thus making it more welcoming. Adjacent to sunken court was the Recreation Pavilion. In the image here, it's at the left, just out of frame. Besides the seating area pictured earlier, that structure's enclosed areas contain restrooms, a recreation office, and a snack bar where teens could find work and buy food between games. Next slide. Open-air passageways through the structure allowed easy passage from the street, again making it a welcoming place. In the picture shown here, you can see the rear of the Recreation Pavilion with the sunken basketball court directly in front of it. The image is looking roughly south with East Street on the other side of the pavilion. The restrooms were located at left, and the recreation office was located between the two passageways marked by the arrows. The snack bar came next, and then the seating area was all the way to the right. Next slide. In typical adventure-style fashion, the entire plaza revolved around versatility. Even the sunken basketball court could be used for far more than just basketball. Its sunken nature meant the stairs on its edges could be used for seating, allowing the court to be used as an outdoor theater for performances. It also had sprinklers installed to double as a splash park in summer, as you see here, and an ice skating rink in winter. Next slide. 3 concrete sculptures by William Tarr were located at the edges of the plaza. Ranging in height from about 3 feet to 15 feet, the 3 pieces are together called numbers. The concrete markers are rectangular in overall form with alternating notches and protrusions formed by an array of differently sized, raised and engraved hieroglyphic-like numbers and geometric shapes. The markers are evocative in both form and function of an ancient stela, particularly those of Mesoamerica, which were often used to differentiate commemorative and special public areas. The pieces are notable in DC as being the first known example of an art piece that used numerals as a design element rather than as a purely practical way to denote numbers. In May of 1968, the plaza opened to much fanfare. Hundreds of residents came to see this unique space. Mayor Walter Washington was there, as was Brooke Astor. Lady Bird Johnson spoke. Next slide. So we have a short 1-minute video here from that day which shows the playground in action, if you could just play. There should be audio for it.
Eyesore, a sad place to send youngsters for an education. But thanks to a generous donation from the Vincent Astor Foundation, all that has been changed. Buchanan Plaza has now become the most exciting playground in all of Washington. Here, Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Astor, and the rest of the committee gathered for the dedication ceremonies.
While Buchanan Plaza belongs first and foremost to this school, it also belongs to everyone in the neighborhood. It is a place where all ages can come together and find when they get there that there's lots to do. Who can put a price tag on boredom? Who can add up the cost of unchallenged energies? This kind of round-the-clock community playground is a new and constructive answer to the urban problem.
Okay, you go to the next slide. So unfortunately, a decade later, Buchanan Plaza fell into a state of neglect and disrepair. It was not a fault of the design, rather it was from bureaucratic confusion. The Recreation Department and the Education Department could never fully agree on who had maintenance responsibilities over the site, and the plaza simply fell through the cracks after Buchanan School closed. Next slide. It was Capitol Hill resident John Matthews, who goes by the nickname Peter Bug, who found it again. In the late 1970s, he saw an opportunity for the abandoned site. His training was in education, and his specialty was shoes. He took the structure that previously had the snack bar, recreation office, and restrooms, and closed the open-air passageways and turned it into the Peter Bug Shoe Academy. There, young people were taught a trade and were encouraged to be creative. While the building became their after-school workshop, the sunken court became their proving grounds as the students donned rollerblades that they built and shoes that they repaired. Annual community festivals have been held at the Peter Bug Shoe Academy since the 1970s, and in recent years have coincided with the Juneteenth holiday. Regular performances have also been held on a stage in the sunken court. In 2011, the Hill Rag community newspaper called Peter Bug, quote, practically a Capitol Hill legend. And Councilmember Charles Allen has called Peter Bug, quote, an institution and a bedrock of Ward 6 in our community. Next slide. Before the board today, the Buchanan School Plaza Peter Bug Shoe Academy is nominated to be a DC landmark. The applicant is the Historic Preservation Office, and the property is owned by the district government. The boundary of the landmark is marked in red in the slide pictured here. It represents the remaining portion of the site, which is the entirety of Lot 826 and Square 1042. The property is eligible to be entered in the DC Inventory of Historic Sites under DC Criteria B for history, D for architecture and urbanism, and F for work of creative masters. Next slide. The plaza is a remnant of what was built in 1968. However, the site retains its most historically and architecturally significant features. The adventure-style playground is no longer intact, having been dismantled by the 1980s, and townhouses have been built in its place within the last 5 years. However, similar playgrounds, including some by Friedberg himself, still exist in other cities, including New York. In DC, Friedberg planned the playground at Fort Lincoln Park in Northeast, which, although designed in a more rustic theme, carries adventure-style ideals. The far more unique elements at Buchanan are the sunken court, the recreation pavilion building, and the sculptures, all of which remain and convey their stories. Next slide. Architecturally, the sunken court remains one of the oldest examples of its kind in the nation. The work of a master, Paul Friedberg, the sunken court forms a connection to his earlier examples now lost, like Reith Plaza and Public School 166 in New York, and to later examples that help define the form of these modern urban spaces, like PV Plaza in Minneapolis and the now modified Pershing Park in DC. Buchanan Plaza's sunken court serves essentially as the missing link in Friedberg's design history. Buchanan was a nearly exact copy of Reith Plaza in design, though smaller in scale, With Reese almost completely gone, Buchanan Plaza remains the closest example to that most important and influential plaza design. Because of all this, the plaza is eligible under DC criteria D for architecture and urbanism and F for creative masters. Next slide. The Recreation Pavilion building, though slightly modified by having its passageways enclosed, still remains well preserved in its general form and details, including the notable waffle roof and protruding brick patterns. The building still demonstrates a distinct 1960s modern aesthetic, connecting the site to the period when adventure-style playgrounds were in fashion and beautification was in favor. Buchanan Plaza is most ambitious, most realized, and most tangible remnant of Lady Bird Johnson's inner city beautification program. Similar projects that followed were far smaller in scope, like the small Hobart Twins Park in Columbia Heights. Larger projects like Lady Bird Johnson Park on Columbia Island and the Potomac River were related to beautification's aesthetic goal instead of its inner city social mission. Next slide. While the sunken court exhibits the mark of Paul Friedberg, the pavilion resonates with the influence of the site's other architect, Simon Breen's. In 1974, Breen's co-authored the book, The Pedestrian Revolution, which argued for cities planned for pedestrians instead of cars. In that book, he wrote that, quote, traditionally, streets have served as a communal outdoor living room, which he said the automobile had destroyed. Breen's was a promoter of wide sidewalks, like those seen at Buchanan, and pedestrian-oriented planning. Seen here are two of his projects from 1968. The Lexington School for the Deaf in Queens, New York is at top, and Buchanan Plaza's Recreation Pavilion is at bottom. Both elevations are characterized by the use of exposed concrete horizontal and vertical elements surrounding red brick bays. Both structures emphasize their horizontal nature so as not to tower over pedestrians. Both are located close to the sidewalk to be accessible. The length of each brick bay is between 13 and 20 feet wide, which corresponds to the approximate street front width of a typical row house or storefront in the Capitol Hill and Queens neighborhoods. So these buildings mimic their surrounding streets of red brick row houses. Walking up one of the stoops of Buchanan and through what was originally an open-air passageway to the sunken basketball court would thus feel no different to a child than walking up to their own front door and into their own home. So it was no coincidence that contemporaries described Buchanan Plaza as, quote, an outdoor living room. Next slide. The Peterbug Shoe Academy has expanded upon that idea, making the site a welcoming home away from home for young people. Peterbug Shoe Academy has helped endure continuity of public service at the site that started with people like Lady Bird Johnson and Walter Washington. As beautification intended, the Peterbug Shoe Academy has become a community gathering place, hosting festivals, concerts, and performances. It has become a neighborhood icon, boosting local pride, and even encouraging visits by celebrities, including Muhammad Ali and Jesse Jackson. Peterbug saved and expanded upon the original social mission of beautification at the site. The Peterbug Academy also continued the intentions of adventure-style playgrounds by allowing young people to use tools and items usually limited only to adults, and it relates to Paul Friedberg's ideology. Peterbug took a place designed for learning and creativity and used it for those exact purposes. The Peterbug history of the site complements the 1968 beautification history. Because of its connection to both beautification and the Peterbug Shoe Academy, the site is eligible under DC Criterion B for history. It is recommended that the period of significance start in 1968 when the plaza opened and end in 1997, 25 years before the present date, which is the minimum requirement for listing as a DC landmark. This is different than what was proposed in the nomination, which was 1968 to 1978 when the plaza was abandoned. Upon further inspection, staff believes it is important to more fully recognize the social and community importance of the Peterbug Shoe Academy, thus the longer period of significance. As a result, staff does not recommend forwarding the nomination to the National Register at this time, as it would be difficult to make a case for the property under criteria consideration A for properties less than 50 years old. The Peterbug Shoe Academy at the site opened at the site in about 1977, 78, meaning that its use at the site will exceed 50 years in only about 5 years, after which forwarding it to the National Register would be more appropriate. Should the board choose to have the nomination forward to the National Register now, staff recommends limiting the period of significance to only 1968, the year of construction, so that would remove equal recognition of the important and deserving Peterbug history. Next slide. In summary, staff recommends that the board designate the Buchanan School Plaza Peterbug Shoe Academy at 1320 East Street Southeast a DC landmark with a period of significance from 1968 to 1997, and does not recommend forwarding the nomination to the National Register at this time. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Do board members have any questions?
Thank you for this fascinating presentation. I'm curious as to whether one can decouple the two aspects of the nomination, which are, equally important or both very important, and go ahead and submit the one, the basketball court now, and then recouple them later in 5 years when the Peterbug Shoe Academy, or when the 50-year threshold is reached. Is that a possibility rather than holding off on everything and submitting it as a sort of joint application in 5 years?
Yeah, I would prefer not to see that happen, mainly out of respect for the contributions of the Peterbug Shoe Academy. For 54 years, starting in 1968, the Plaza has had like a continuous mission and use centered around helping the community and helping young people. And for 45 of those years, it's been Peterbug doing it. Residents of Capitol Hill, out of everyone I've talked to, almost no one even knew about the Buchanan Plaza or beautification or Friedberg, but everyone knows Peterbug and even have personal connections to this site. The plaza probably wouldn't even exist today if Peterbug hadn't rescued it in the late 70s. Probably would have just sat empty. So the entire history of the site, from beautification to Peterbug, is related and continuous. So as a historian, I don't think it would be appropriate to split that history up. It sends the wrong message that somehow the Peterbug history is somehow less deserving because of some arbitrary 50-year rule. I don't think it shouldn't be separated or regulated to an amended nomination that may never happen. The Peterbug Academy, not an addendum to the plaza, it is the plaza. So out of respect for that role and to give full and equal recognition to the Peterbug history, I would highly recommend keeping the history together, especially considering that, it'll all be eligible together for the National Register in only about 5 years. So let the whole full representative history go through at the same time, which would strengthen the overall nomination and truly recognize the site's impact on Capitol Hill.
Great. Thank you for that very thorough answer. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay.
Todd, do you have information about the evolution of the site prior to this plaza's existence in the development of the school? Because I don't know a lot about Buchanan School, but I know enough to know that it was expanded on and made larger through time because of the need that was there in the district. But when it was built, certainly it was at a time period where use of exterior spaces was integrated into the normal education program. And I wondered if you knew if you had any information about what existed before the plaza that we're documenting here.
Yeah, I don't have too many details. I know there was row houses early on. Buchanan School was built in 1895. It had a couple expansions to it. Next to it, the Buchanan Plaza playground, there had been plans for doing something to that area going back to, I think, the 1930s, and they just never did anything until 1968. There was a earlier picture that showed how it was just kind of an open paved area. Over time, they did take away parts of the school, and now the school is housing, and then the townhouses up where the playground used to be. But I know there's also a lot of relation to Watkins Elementary School, which is right across the street, right across 13th Street. I know for a very brief time, they actually closed 13th Street to sort of make it to connect Buchanan Plaza's park space to Watkins Elementary School's park, but that didn't last for too long. But I'm not as familiar with the history of the school itself.
All right. You're muted, Gretchen.
I asked because thank you. I wonder if it further strengthens and gives some more depth to the history to to provide the full chronology of the site or a summary of the chronology of the site, if not certainly in detail, because I think the focus certainly is the era that you're discussing, and it have included. But I do know from the original construction of schools, both the white and the colored schools at that time called colored, the black schools had play areas, even if they were smaller areas, because they were part of the curriculum for the kids to be able to go inside and out for school programs. So I wondered if there's an opportunity to include that with this information that you have.
Yeah, I know there is some more information in the nomination on the school. I just don't remember off the top of my head.
I read what you have in the school, but I'm still asking the question.
Okay. I mean, we could add a little bit more to the nomination about that.
Okay. Other questions from board members?
Or Todd, even if it's not known, just stating that it's not yet known sometimes is helpful. Being a researcher and a preservationist, sometimes it helps as much to say what is known as is what is not known.
Sure.
I'm sure you and Kim can come to a conclusion on that.
All right. Okay, I believe we have Beth Purcell registered to speak on this application. Is Ms. Purcell on the line? Do you see her, Juliana?
Hi, yes. Ms. Purcell's just been unmuted.
Okay, perfect. Ms. Purcell, are you ready to make your statement?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Great.
Okay, my name is Beth Purcell. I'm testifying on behalf of the Capitol Hill Restoration Society. We strongly support the designation of the Buchanan School Plaza Peter Bug Shoe Academy to the inventory of historic sites. I'd like to focus on the contribution of John Peter Bug Matthews to the heritage of Buchanan Plaza, continuing the Adventure Playground's purpose to improve city life, serving all residents and teenagers in particular. In 1977, in the former Snack Bar building, Mr. Matthews opened the Peter Bug Shoe Academy and Community Center. He has taught a generation of young people a valuable trade and life lessons on service and respect, and alumni return to pay it forward. Also, several years ago, Mr. Matthews sponsored a street tree near the Shoe Academy, and he intentionally selected a tree, in this case an oak, that would nourish wildlife, and the tree was planted. Everyone looks forward to Peter Bug Day in the spring, which is a community celebration, and to the barbecue on most weekends. So we support designating the Buchanan School Plaza Peter Bug Shoe Academy as a DC landmark with the period of significance recommended by the staff. And thank you for considering our comments.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Purcell. Does anyone have any questions for her? Thank you. In addition to the testimony that we heard today from Capitol Hill Restoration Society, we also have a letter in support from the ANC. We have a letter of support additionally from both Council Member Charles Allen, as well as Council Member Robert White. And we have a petition of support signed by 624 residents of the community. We received a late letter of opposition from Patrick Brennan that has now been added to the box file. So that just came in overnight and was placed in the box this morning. Any other questions from board members? All right. Then are we ready to deliberate? Okay.
I'll start if you'd like. I think it's a well-written nomination. And I agree with the staff's recommendation for having it be on the DC listing and then holding until we can submit for the entire submission for the national nomination. I would like to see a bit more about the grounds and the area that were provided for recreation when the school was originally built, and a little more on the site chronology as it develops. And in particular, I don't know, Dr. Jones, maybe you know more than me archaeologically about the site, but I know that there are some properties, very old properties on Capitol Hill near here where there have been some archaeological findings, but I don't know if you think there's any potential much earlier than, the settlement and, construction of schools and buildings that might be there. If there's any sort of earlier pre-settlement things that you might think that should be documented or known about the site before.
So I would say, considering what the time period is for this, that wouldn't actually be applicable. So I'm talking about the time period of significance for this. It can be added as additional information but it would also just be very brief preliminary. This is the history of this land, kind of in a survey of indigenous occupation, if that's what you're talking about, or you're talking about early like DC. What are you referring to? I guess that would be also helpful.
Early.
Oh, okay. The only thing that at this point, there probably wouldn't be any archaeology on this particular area.
No.
If there is, that would be helpful, but that's something that we can refer to Dr. Tricoli and see if there are any site reports that reflect history of what was taken on this specific or in this specific boundary. But if there isn't anything, then I would say no, there is nothing to add to this.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. And I agree with all that you've said, Gretchen. And I'm ready to make a motion that we support the designation of Buchanan Plaza, Peterbug Shoe Academy, and ask that, in keeping with the staff's recommendation, that this be elevated to the National Register once it's eligible in 5 years.
I second that.
All right. So any further discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Then the motion carries. Thank you to the staff for bringing this forward. Our next application is one that's coming back to us after having made some adjustments based on board comments at 3500 Connecticut Avenue Northwest. Is staff ready to present?
Yes, good morning. This is Steve. And as you teed this up, this is a returning concept. The board reviewed a concept proposal for a pergola in public space in front of 3500 Connecticut Avenue back in July. You all denied that application, finding it to be incompatible with the character of the buildings it was in front of and the Cleveland Park Historic District. But you did leave open the option for the applicants to study alternatives to the proposal and return to the board, and gave the advice that if they did return to the board, to encourage them to go to the ANC prior to doing that. So the applicants have revised the proposal in several ways. They have narrowed the piers that will support it. They were 8 inches square previously. They are now 6 inches square, so that it has a lighter appearance. It has been shortened. It was previously spec'd out at 60 feet long. It has been shortened to align with the frontage of the business and the business's storefronts, which is about 47 to 48 feet wide, so that it doesn't project out in front of the neighboring business, which is a bank to the north. It has been lowered in height so that it no longer is taller than the storefronts and doesn't visually block the decorative iron railings that are on the tops of those, which was one of the issues that the board raised in the previous review. And it's been pulled away from the facade of the building by about 2 to 2.5 feet to provide a little bit of space. One of the aspects of the previous proposal that the board found incompatible was that it was pushed right up against the face of the storefronts. Through a little bit more careful measuring of the entire space, which I participated in together with a member of the Cleveland Park Architectural Review Committee, the applicant, and the owner of the business. We were able to determine that the clear portion of the sidewalk and the tree box space and the width of this structure would allow for some separation of the structure from the face of the building, so that the storefronts and the storefront windows wouldn't be entirely underneath and in shadow of the structure. So those are the changes that have been made. The applicants did go back to the ANC. They actually took the previous version after the board had reviewed it and found it incompatible. They took the previous version back to the board, or to the ANC, which the ANC did support. And we received a letter last night from the ANC commissioner, the single member district commissioner, encouraging the board to approve that version of the proposal. However, there's a little bit of a problem with that, in that the structure cannot extend the full 60 feet in depth or in width, because again, it would project in front of the neighboring business. During the COVID emergency, DDOT sort of looked the other way about businesses that expanded into public space in front of other businesses, particularly if they weren't competing for the same space. But with the COVID emergency over, and with a permit now pending for a permanent structure, that structure wouldn't meet the public space regulations by projecting in front of another storefront and blocking that storefront window. So 47 to 48 feet is about the extent to which this can extend to align with the frontage of the business. So if the board is inclined to approve the revised proposal, we're putting in the staff report, just reminding you that this would be the first time that you all have done that in front of contributing buildings, and particularly small-scale contributing buildings. The other applications that the board has seen and approved for these have typically been in front of non-contributing, much larger scale buildings. One in DuPont Circle that we knew about, and one in Capitol Hill. And Marnique, you actually pointed out one that's along K Street that is in front of some contributing buildings, but is pulled significantly away from the face of those buildings with the very wide public space frontage along K Street. So in some respects, this is a little bit of a new idea to approve these directly in front of small scale contributing buildings. And we can treat it as a test case to see how it turns out. And the board, we can show this to you in at a future meeting once it's constructed, and you can decide whether or not you think this is something that should be replicated or is appropriate to replicate in other historic districts, or if there are lessons to be learned from it. But we just wanted to, sort of alert the board that this is a little bit of a new frontier for you, and is a little different than something you all have approved previously. So with that, I think the applicants would like to walk you through their proposal a little bit more specifically, and they've got some nice images to give you a sense of what it would look like.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Is the applicant ready to present?
Yes. Yeah, I am.
You can begin.
All right. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Steve, for the intro. Yeah, you guys may remember when I was here the last time, but thanks for having me back. And yeah, I'll just go over in a little bit more detail some of the things that have changed. So yeah, the new proposal is 12 by 48. It's going to would be 700 or 576 square feet, sort of covering their existing outdoor seating area. The goal is to create a little bit more of a functional space. a little more control of the elements. The roof can pitch open and closed, so you can get a little bit of sunlight when you want, shade when it's a little bit too sunny, that kind of thing. So yeah, the goal is sort of to create a more functional space, sort of a place for the community to come and enjoy. And we did our best to create a proposal that would be as least obtrusive to the building as possible. So some of the main features are the same as before, the controllable roof, the LED lights that would give a little bit more lighting to the area. Fans can be installed to get a little airflow, circulating airflow, and the gutters would, internal gutters to help reroute the water. Yeah. Okay, next slide. So yeah, just a summary of some of the main design changes since last time. Steve went over most of them. The height been shifted so that the beam lines up with the balcony a little bit better, so we're not covering up that railing. Helps it blend in a little bit more. Shifted about 2 feet or so off the building just to give a little breathing room to the building. And yeah, after the ANC meeting, the main concern from the public was the walkway space. So this proposal would still allow for a little bit more walkway, bringing it up to 9 feet total for pedestrians to walk, which was the main concern that we tried to help with there, even though they're allowed to go out. And then the zones were changed. Yeah, I think the 60 was, yeah, I'm not sure if that was just erroneously measured, but yeah, so the post would be a 12 by 12 zone, a 12 by 16, and a 12 by 20. So that would make the posts line up on the building a little bit better to be a little bit less intrusive. And then we had our engineer go back and look at it and make sure that the 6 by 6 posts, which are just a little bit slimmer profile, would still be able to support the structure, which it would be. So yeah, we made that change as well. Go to the next slide. So yeah, this is just a photo. So we tried to match the color. On the left is like what we would have, and the right is what's existing on the building. So you can see the color matches pretty well. So we tried to keep it in line. You can go to the next slide. Some of the more building features you can see on the right is that the roof line. So that's about 11 or 12 inches. And our beam profile is 10 inches, so we would be fitting right inside of that to, yeah, sort of tuck it away in that little, visually. You know, next slide. So here's some photos. That's the cafe area. So this is looking southeast down Connecticut. Each of those tiles on the sidewalk is 3 feet each, 3 feet by 3 feet. So we'd have about a 9-foot walkway. So our posts would bring it back kind of in line with that subway grate on the ground. So we'd be bringing it back a couple feet. But yeah, that's the area. You can go to the next slide. This is just a view from across the street just to show you the area. It's already kind of shaded, so it would sort of tuck away in that area, was the idea. Okay, next slide. Some more photos. We brought out a post just to sort of line it up against the building and line up all the posts. That's one of our posts there. It is wrapped in plastic just to help prevent it from scratches and whatnot. But that's sort of it's not cut to length. That's just the sizes that we get them in, and we cut them down during install. So, but yeah, that's just to show you sort of what the posts look like against the building. You can go to the next slide. So yeah, on the left is a photo of the space during the summer. You can see all the umbrellas are out. It's pretty sunny and bright. You can see visually that the umbrellas visually take up quite a lot of the building and block up a lot of the building. And just comparing that to our profile of the beam, it would actually be in some regards less visually obtrusive. So that's just a little comparison, a point to make. So you can go to the next slide. Here's another photo of a little closer up picture. You can see all the existing shrubs. We thought about moving them and making the walkway even bigger, but we felt like the greenery in the area was really valuable. Having greenery and green as much as possible in all the sidewalk was really beneficial to keep. So we decided it'd be better to keep those, and we sort of doubled that as a way to sort of hide the posts. So those shrubs can be used to sort of visually block the post as well. You can go to the next slide. That's sort of shown in the renders as well. So here's another render just kind of from that same angle looking south down Connecticut. Just giving a little more breathing room to the pedestrians, and yeah, and you can see the greenery sort of helping hide the posts a little bit as well. You know, the next slide. Here's the other side, other angle. Yeah, a little bit the same thing, just a little bit more walking area for the people, for the pedestrians, and the posts, the shrubs can be used to cover up the posts a little bit as much as possible. Okay, next slide. There's another angle. You can see that 2-foot gap that was added off the building just to give a little bit of space. Just, yeah, another angle for you. You go to the next slide. Here's a top view. You can see the zones on the left closest to the entrance is the 12 by 12, and then the 12 by 16, then the 12 by 20 on the right. You go to the next one. So this is the only photo I could find of the tent that they are allowed to put up, but obviously this is much more visually obtrusive and less elegant, less appealing, and not as great of a way to utilize the space. So this is what we're trying to avoid putting back up. So we're hoping that we've sort of found a solution that can work for everybody here, and not have to go back to this, I guess, is the idea. You can go to the next slide. This is just another photo from the inside of the tent. From Mark does some community outreach stuff and cooking for the neighborhood. So this is a photo from that. But yeah, this is this is just the tent that we're trying to avoid going back to, I guess is the idea. So you go to the next slide. Yep, some final notes. This is just a photo of the plat. I'm not a professional surveyor, so but I did my best to get all these measurements as accurate as possible. So yeah, the cafe permit is for a little over 1,000 square feet, but our proposed addition would be under 576 square feet, with a couple feet, about 2.5 feet off the building, and that would still allow for a little bit more walking room for the pedestrians. And yeah, I think this is hopefully something that can work for everybody here. It was the goal. You can go to the next slide. So yeah, in conclusion, we hope our proposed pergola would sort of complement the historic features of the building as much as possible and detract from it as little as possible, matching the colors as much, sort of matching the elements as best we can, the posts lining up along the building a little bit better now. Less obtrusive than an umbrella in some regards, than, a dozen or so umbrellas that get placed out there. Zones were shifted, changing up the zones a little bit to align the posts a little bit better, and the beam shifted to align with the roof line, and yeah, ultimately providing a little bit larger of a walkway for pedestrians. So next slide. Yep, that's about everything. Yeah, so we had full support from the ANC, and then we had full support from the Cleveland Park Historical Society, the ARC, on Tuesday. So yeah, I think that's about it. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know Mark said he was going to try to be here. I think he wanted to add a few things, but I'm not sure if he made it here or not yet.
Oh, I'm here. Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to thank everyone for the opportunity for us to represent. I know that is stretching on your part to really try to accommodate this, and it is greatly appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you. Can you clarify if what you've done is reduce the overall width of the pergola structure itself and move it off of the building, or have you maintained the width of the pergola but just shifted it off of the building 2 feet?
We've just shifted it. I think there was just a couple feet were mismeasured. So we thought we would need to, but just shifting it off 2 feet would still allow for that 12 feet and still allow for that extra 2 feet for the pedestrians.
Got it. Okay, so this was always 12 feet wide, not 14 feet wide.
Yep, yeah, that's the max width that the motor can push on the roof is 12 feet. But yeah, if it had to be down to like 11, if that was what we needed to get that 2 feet, we could do that. But yeah, the measurements work out so that we did a little more careful measuring and it would work out. Yeah.
And posts are now 6 by 6 rather than 8 by 8.
Yes, yeah, a little bit slimmer.
Gretchen, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a couple. I wondered if, I can't remember from our last discussion, but did you look at other reversible solutions? I know you showed some clunky umbrellas and a quick vinyl white tent. Certainly there are a lot of beautiful terrace solutions that have been created during the pandemic around town, but did you look at something that wasn't mechanically attached to the grade?
Yeah, so I did a little bit of research into if it would be possible to do a retractable awning that sort of extends out and over. And based on what I talked to a few companies is that it really wouldn't be possible. The bay windows, it wouldn't really be possible to attach to that and to extend out 10, 12 feet. And to do that 60 foot or 48 foot width would need to be forget how heavy it would be, but it would be a lot of weight, and structurally that wouldn't really work for on the bay window. It couldn't support that weight. So the only way to make it work would be to go up above that first row of windows and have it go out in that way, which would be just worse, I guess.
So that's an awning. Did you look at other solutions for tents that might be better detailed, or beautiful umbrellas, maybe like the ones you're showing in the foreground here in this rendering, as alternatives? Or is there a reason you feel strongly about having this continuous pergola along the entire length of the face of the building?
I just thought the pergola would work. I didn't actually look at other tents, so to speak. I tried to find something that was like removable, like something that would like fold up in some way so you could, but there's nothing that would really work and bring functionality more so than just umbrellas, I guess, that I could find.
Okay. And then you mentioned in your presentation initially that this is a community space. Is it a community space? Like anybody who's hanging out waiting for the metro or in town can use it as like a little pocket park area, or is this for patrons of the restaurant?
It's for patrons of the restaurant. I
Okay.
guess my thought behind that was just creating a space that was, I guess, just
For patrons of the restaurant.
yeah, I guess so, yeah.
Okay. And then could you clarify where the WMATA vault is in relationship to this?
The what? I'm sorry.
The WMATA vault. There's a grading, and it looks like some of the tables currently are over the grading, which is the vault for WMATA for the metro stop. Can you clarify where this is in relationship to that?
Oh yeah, so you can go back to the maybe we can do the top photo. Yeah. You can go forward to the
There it
top.
is.
How about
It's-
that? Yeah. So one of the posts would line up in that little gap on the left. So it would cover this area. One of the posts, sort of where the middle shrub is where one of the posts would land.
Mhm.
And then it would
There's
it
a
wouldn't
guy
block it.
sitting. There's a guy sitting with an orange shirt at a table, and then there's a taller triangular tree. It's right at that line where that tree is.
Yeah, one of the posts would land in that little strip of concrete that goes in between the two of them.
Have you met with WMATA yet?
No, I wasn't sure what that grate actually was. So
Yeah, that's probably the mechanical intake for WMATA, and you're over the WMATA metro stop, so you.
They may have to access that.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Mark. We have clearance, from putting our tents up, over the last 2 years, we've got WMATA signing off on where those tent weights went. This is actually a smaller footprint than what we've had in the past.
But this is bolted to the ground. How is this attached to the ground, I guess is the question.
Well, this bolts to the ground, but those weights were 2,400 pounds each. they were harder to move than this if we needed to move it. But the way this is set up, but let's put it this way: we've talked to everybody in the city, at every agency, and this hasn't come up based on what a public space permit allows.
So you've
Yeah,
been to
just
pub-
just
you've
just
been
to
to pub-
just if I could just clarify, because we talked about this a lot when we were on site. And the posts are being mounted outside of they're not being mounted on the grates themselves. They're being mounted between the grates where there's a space here between them and then outside the grates here. So my understanding is that is allowed. It's just they can't and that WMATA is okay with a structure, although, you know, it's at the applicant's risk that WMATA might ask them to remove the structure at some point if they need to get into that area to remove machinery or anything. So it's like any public space enclosure is that it needs to be demountable within 24 hours if they're required to do it. But that the structure of this has been designed now to where it will not rest on the vaults themselves.
Okay.
And our structure is removable in 24 hours if we needed to. That's doable.
I do have a question. This is Board Member Jones. Yeah, now that we kind of keep going back and forth, but are there issues about people sitting on top of this and potential liquid? I don't know if spills are happening or anything else with this, that there may be an issue. I'm more concerned.
It
Has
rains
this
in
been
there, so
okay? I'm wondering if you need to just go back to them again, just to let them know about the permanency of the structure, and also just checking to make sure there are no safety issues. The other thing that pops up, can we go back a few slides, or I think it's back. Oh no, maybe it's forward. Forward, I'm sorry. Okay. So just back one more. So, and kind of going back to Gretchen's question about community space. My question is, in the evenings, how is this being secured? Because the other thing, thinking about, it's one thing to think about daytime and when everybody's out, but on days that it's closed and that sort of thing, is this an open space where you can see everything freely? Are you chaining up everything? How is this being handled in the evening? Are the tables being stacked up in chairs? Because we have seen that in DC where all the tables and chairs will be stacked up.
It's exactly the same way we've been doing it for the last 13 years. Nothing changes in the way we operate our patio. This is not a new patio. It's been there for 13 years.
No, I'm asking for
Nothing will change in terms of our tables and chairs, where they're located or how they're stored overnight.
Right, and I'm asking, how is that happening?
They're set and left in place.
Okay.
We don't chain them up. We don't pile them up. We make it look as pretty as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, sure.
I have a question. Are you done, Alexander?
Yes.
Hi. So I missed the first discussion on this. Not sure why, but so forgive my somewhat ignorance. But you have a outdoor dining space around the corner, do you not?
We do. We do.
Yeah. Is there a reason why something like this was not proposed for that area?
Yeah, it's a summer garden, and they won't allow it. Our tent, the tent rules, and the expansion of public space use as a result of COVID allowed for tent or covering of the space over public space in the front of the building.
Okay. So wait a minute. So that's public space around the corner of the building as well, right?
You know what? I'm not an expert on it. We have a summer garden permit for that, and we have a public space permit for the front. They're viewed very differently.
My question is simply this: was it ever considered?
Yes.
Was something like this ever considered for that space? And was that a regulatory issue that you were not proposing something there, or your preference?
No, it was. I don't remember because it was years ago. We've been working on this for years. That was where we originally wanted this pergola and could not get it there. I don't remember the reasons why. But that's when we transitioned to the front based on guidance. I believe it was from DCRA.
Steve, do you know anything about that?
I do not. No, sorry.
So you all, your answer is you don't know.
I don't recall. It was over 2 years ago.
Matt, this is Carissa. You raise a good point, and I think during the first presentation, there was a lot of conversation about options in the front versus the pergola, and I think Gretchen talked a little bit about it too. I remember somebody noting that the reason why the pergola was the best option is because umbrellas were too clunky or cumbersome. Like there was a lot of discussion about other options, and it appeared to be that this was the least sort of obstructive option. But perhaps, Martinique, do you remember that, or maybe Steve?
I don't remember us talking about the front versus the side as much.
The side.
Well, so my question is simply, which problems are we trying to solve, and what's the best way to solve them? If what you all are seeking is an outdoor dining space that, you know, is all weather or more weather than what you have today, I guess I'm just wondering about, you know, the sort of more direct and sort of thorough examination of the side versus the front.
I'll jump in
Whether
on
that's
this.
occurred.
I'm a simpleton. We operating in the front of the space for us, from a staffing perspective, from access perspective, from entry to the restaurant. Our main restaurant entry is on that corner. Anything we do on that side is going to block our entry. It also will affect, it'll encroach up on that corner as well for strollers and things like that. So there were, I don't remember how many different ways we looked at it, but when we went way back to figure out how we got out some additional outside seating in this that got us 3-season seating, we looked at the side versus the front. We looked at access. We looked at fire regulations, exiting in the event of a fire, all kinds of stuff. And I can't pinpoint exactly where it is, but our request is firmly for the front of the building, just like where our tent was. Because our option is to put the tent back, which, like I said, we don't want to do, and we would put it back in the same place we had it for operational reasons, as well as seating capacity and comfort of the guests. So we're really here for that. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I don't want to go back to the side. We're here for the front. We spent all this time and money trying to get everybody happy on the chain to make sure what we're doing we can do. So with all due respect, we have solved for X, and this front is where we landed.
Yeah, for what it appears, you can
I've
get
got
a
a
lot
few.
more seating on the front than the side.
I've got a few questions, if I may. While we're looking at this, does the tent cover the same area that's shown covered by the pergola, proposed pergola in this image?
Bigger. The tent's bigger.
It's bigger.
And
Much.
extends farther to the left?
The tent starts at the front door and will go all the way down almost in front of the bank and comes almost as far front as it can come because of the ballast weights. So the tent really pinches sidewalk clearance and strollers. That's what we heard from the neighborhood the most, that when that tent was there, it made it really hard with sidewalk and strollers, which led us to this other alternative.
Thank you. So in what months of the year is the tent installed? Is the tent up? I've never seen it up. I don't go up and down this strip all the time, but I have been recently, both last time and this time.
Well, we didn't put it back this year, although it's going back up for Thanksgiving weekend, because that's when we're doing our turkey fry for the city to cook people's turkeys for them who are unable to cook them. So it'll be up next Wednesday through Monday, and then it'll come down on Monday. But that tent typically is up.
Yeah,
September. Well, ideally it's year round. We would want to keep it year round, but in the past it was September through. Actually, you know what? It was year round. We had it for 12 months. I take it back. We did not take it down. So we had it going 12 months because it protected from wind, snow, cold. It was heated, and then it protected from rain in the summertime. So it was 12 months.
I see. Even clement weather, you still had the tent up.
Yes. because of threat of rain, it allowed us to maintain that outside seating when it rained.
Okay, all right, I understand. Thank you. So can someone, maybe the architect or maybe you, explain how the internal gutters and I'm not totally, is this a waterproof roof when it wants to be, when it needs to be? And if so, where does the stormwater go when it's raining, and where I assume it spills out on the sidewalk in some way through one of the columns, or could you talk about that a little bit?
Yep, I have all the technical drawings. I didn't include them because I didn't
You
think
can just explain it. You don't need to.
right. So yeah, so there's a gutter, so when those louvers close, they sort of interlock, and it's not like airtight, but it keeps the water in those little in the channels of the louver, and then it pitches one way or the other, and it runs. There's gutters that line the inside, and then like you said, yeah, it reroutes it to one of the posts, and you have a pipe that runs down the post and spits it out at the bottom.
And how many downspouts do you have?
So you can do as many as you want. I would think we would do one for each zone, I guess. So probably 3 of the posts would have downspouts, or maybe you might be able to get away with 2.
And would they spill onto the walkway we see here, or internally into the seating area? Where would the water go
So
from
you
the
can
downspout?
put it wherever we want. Usually that's kind of just determined in the field, wherever it makes the most sense, wherever the nearest like grate is, or wherever the water would naturally go if there was no pergola there. That's sort of where we would have it. So yeah, that's the idea behind it.
Because it seems like, these downspouts spilling onto grade is going to create at some point either an inconvenience or a hazard for pedestrians, unless you dump it into the seating area, which you probably don't want to do, because especially would people be seated there during the rain? Could people be? I mean, would it be waterproof enough for people to be sitting there?
This is Mark. Yeah, people can sit underneath in the rain because the louvers will close. But for clarification, the building's gutters that are currently there dump out on the side of the building and roll over the sidewalk to the street. So this actually would push that rain away from the building and away from people walking through it on the sidewalk in that area.
The existing building downspouts spill onto the sidewalk?
The existing building's downspouts dump right outside our front doors. Yes.
Right, but that wouldn't change with this structure.
Well, that would not change. Anything that fell on top of this structure would not come. Well, there's a 2-foot gap between the structure and the building, so that rain would land on the sidewalk in front of the building, and then the rain that's captured on this roof would run to the side of the structure, across the main sidewalk, just like the building's water does.
Okay. So did you look at I think, last time we looked at this, I sort of got from the board that part of the resistance was the fact that this is all one. It's starting to look like a little building, even though it's open on, oh, that was another question I had. During winter time, would you put plastic up on the sides of this thing and enclose it
No, it'd be unenclosed.
all the time?
Yes.
Guaranteed.
I don't know if I can guarantee that, because I could put a tent up and close the sides and heat it. So
Well, yeah,
our
tent has
intent is
closed sides, but
our intent is not to close this. Can I guarantee that? No. I mean, I have to, like, I'm doing the turkey fry next week. We're going to close the sides and heat the space so our people cooking outside don't freeze. So I can't guarantee that I won't close it at some point. Our intent is to not close it.
right, but during winter months, I mean, I think this is a big deal myself. So that's why I'm asking all these
Understood.
pointed questions. And so I can't imagine that someone who has this structure, when it's freezing, colder than it is now, you wouldn't put sides up and put heaters in. I mean, is that
Well,
not illogical?
it'll have integrated infrared heaters on it.
Well, that's helpful.
Yeah.
And wind and all that stuff. I mean, I think we just have to assume that you're going to enclose it, no?
No, I mean,
It'd be a separate permit.
it'd be a separate, yeah, we don't have we currently do not have plans to enclose these sides.
So you would need a separate permit to enclose the sides?
No.
Yeah, there's
Oh.
yeah, there's unenclosed cafe permits, and then there's enclosed cafe permits. And so you can apply to convert our what would be this,
Okay.
the unenclosed cafe permit into a permanent enclosed cafe. That would be part of that.
I stand
And
corrected.
and Steve, would that come back to the board as a separate permit review so that we could review the enclosure of this or not?
We certainly could. Yeah, you may remember that we had an enclosed cafe come to the board in Woodley Park down in, on Connecticut Avenue, maybe about 4 or 5 months ago. And the board approved that contingent on it being, clear plastic with only sort of kick plates at the bottom that were solid, but that it was that was a more traditional awning that was being erected, but it had enclosed sides with plastic during inclement weather and during the season where you'd expect it to be closed up.
Right, okay. And finally, so did you look at sort of a more, rather than having one 48-foot by 12-foot, I think it is, structure, did you look at having maybe 3 smaller structures? I mean, one thing about that makes this very different from the umbrellas is that the umbrellas are like furniture and you can see past them, around them, through them. This thing is a thing, and it's got this deck that this is probably the most unflattering view of it here, and it shows how it will obscure the contributing buildings behind it. So if it was 3 smaller structures with space in between them, it might be more compatible. Did you look at that instead of having one big long structure, having 3 structures or more?
Chris, I'll jump in on this.
Okay.
This is replacing a completely obscuring tent that
Okay, all right. That doesn't answer my question.
that we chose not to do because we didn't think it was pretty or becoming of the neighborhood or completely blocking. But that's what we're doing. We're trying to
Okay.
avoid the tent option with something
I
much more
understand that,
classier. Yeah.
but I understand that, but I asked you a question. Did you look at having 3 separate smaller structures instead of one long one, more
No,
like umbrellas?
we looked at the engineering on this pergola and we tried to replicate the clear space and the clear span of the seating area we had under the tent.
I'm not sure that would quite work anyways. I'm not sure how we would go about doing that also. And also from this angle, it would be a similar story with the umbrellas. Like I understand how much this takes up on the building, but with umbrellas, it's kind of the same thing. You're going to be blocking a lot of the building as well.
Outer Ridge, that would also be difficult for the spacing of the posts. You'd have
Yes,
you'd
you
have
need
more
more
posts.
posts. Yes, I
And
understand.
they would fall on the grates. So the spacing of this spacing was worked out very specifically with the existing metro grates and with the facade of the building so that the posts didn't fall at sort of awkward points. We didn't ask them to prepare a straight on elevation drawing, but the posts were aligned with breaks in the storefront so that there was some architectural relationship between the structure, the pergola structure and the existing building.
Right. Okay, I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Can I jump in with one other question?
Sure.
So you may have mentioned it, and I apologize, but sometimes in these cases, people do extendable awnings. That's not an option here.
Yeah, like I said, the person that I spoke to, the weight of that fabric for a 60-foot span was, I don't know, 2 or 5, several hundred pounds. So the
60 feet running north-south.
right, something like that.
But,
So it
but
wouldn't.
you could do several awnings, right? It doesn't have to be continuous, right?
Well, it would still be the same. It'd still be the same amount of weight on the
building. There's an attachment point issue because to maintain the bay windows, it became an attachment point to the building. So that would take.
You wouldn't be able to
attachment
attach
points
it
and
in
make
the
it
same
more.
way.
You wouldn't be able to attach it in the same way. What does that mean?
Like how our beam lines up with the cornice, but the roof line, but it doesn't actually connect to it, so it sort of stays in that line visually blending in as much as possible. It wouldn't be able to do that. You would have to raise it up to attach to the building above where the windows are and have it extend down, which would be a lot more.
It's okay. I don't know. I just Googled Parisian awnings and storefronts, and it seems like there's ample
Matt,
examples of things that do that. But I don't know, if somebody looked at it, I guess that's, go ahead, Steve, somebody looked at it.
Matt, part of the problem is this railing that's on top of the storefronts.
Yes,
That if that wasn't there, and the storefronts could support the weight, which I suspect the storefronts probably could support the weight, but the housing, there's no place to put the housing for it, because of the railing. If the railing wasn't there, you could set it on top of the roof of the storefronts, but the housing would be, 18 inches by 18 inches at least. And this railing is right at the edge of the roof line, and so there's no way to do that unless it projected out from the structure, and then you'd have to support that independently.
right. Okay,
All right. Any other questions? We do have ANC Commissioner Pagets on the line, ready to speak on behalf of the ANC. Are you ready to make your statement?
Yep, I am.
Good morning.
Good morning. So we did pass, you guys received the resolution. I'm authorized to speak on the commission's behalf here. We reviewed the original drawings of the pergola, and that was when it was directly abutting the facade of the structure. We approved these drawings unanimously because we felt a smaller pergola would do a disservice to the restaurant and the community, and the pergola being pulled away from the facade would sacrifice sidewalk space, but also be detrimental to the servers who would have to walk in inclement weather to be able to get to the tables. We ask that you approve the original design. Medium Rare is a beloved restaurant, and our community submitted over 65 letters in support and only 5 against the original design. Our ANC unanimously approved the original design and also believes it respects the historic structure that is being put next to. People will easily differentiate between the pergola and the facade of the storefront. Please don't let the aesthetics that the community didn't consider an issue get in the way of business in Cleveland Park, which is struggling amid the pandemic. We have balanced the trade-offs and have decided the original structure was best and hope you respect our wishes. Please also think of the Medium Rare staff when making your decision. And then, Mark has really worked hard with going back to the drawing board, and this is time and money. And, he's a small business owner, and to, continue to put folks through the ringer with these kinds of reviews is really rough. And I want to thank Mark again for trying to come up with the solution that's best. So, and thank you all. That's it.
All right. Thank you. Any questions for the commissioner?
No, just to say thank you for testifying, and it's clear from your testimony that you're considering many things that are outside of our purview and consideration. So we're glad that you're interacting with the community and the applicant.
All right. Any final questions from the board? If not, then are we ready to deliberate? I think one of the things that the staff has proposed here is that, obviously this is a tricky case given that it could be seen as precedent setting. I think the board needs to be clear in any decision that we make here that this is a decision that's being made based on the set of conditions that are relevant in this location. I think it's also important that if we should decide in support of this, that we make it clear that we are using this as somewhat of a test case generally to just understand the impact of structures like this, given the residual effects of the pandemic and the renewed appreciation for our outdoor spaces. I would imagine that requests like this are going to continue to come before us. And I do think it's important that we consider how the needs of the city and business owners will evolve based on this. And so I will, I know this is probably different than most board members based on the questions, but I tend to find this solution less obtrusive, certainly than the tent that they've had here, which is large and, as the owner said, occupies a much more significant area of the sidewalk, but also is unsightly. Doesn't take into consideration any of its relationship to the existing contributing building or the sidewalk, pedestrian paths that we're trying to maintain. I think that attaching something to the existing contributing buildings also, to me, would be more problematic than having something that's completely separate. I think the applicant has done what we asked by lowering the pergola, making the posts smaller. I thought what they presented to us previously was large and clunky and didn't feel of the right scale or proportions for the building that it's sitting in front of. And so I find this solution to be acceptable. The only question for me is whether, as the ANC commissioner has requested, whether we allow this to extend closer to the building. I think the one thing that the applicant made clear is that they always were proposing 12 feet, which sits outside of, now in its current position, sits outside of the vault grates. If this were to move closer to the building and remain at 12 feet, it's clear it would sit on top of those grates, which would be problematic. So I think if others are in agreement with allowing this structure, we'd have to think about what the proper positioning is, certainly outside of the grates, but what then does that do to the overall width of this and its relationship to the existing building, whether we allow it to shift to 14 feet so it's closer to the building. So I'll stop there and see what others' thoughts are here.
Chair, this is Carissa. I appreciate what you said. I was actually prepared to be in the minority with regards to thinking this was improved over the initial presentation. So I agree with you. I appreciate that they detached it from the building and they made the posts smaller and the overall footprint smaller from what we saw initially. So I am in agreement with you, aside from, to your point, the grading issue. But like I said, I was prepared to be in the minority, but I agree with you. And I find this to be acceptable.
So I'll jump in. I appreciate all the work the applicant has done to address the board's concerns. And I appreciate the special condition, that we're in since COVID. And, sort of one of the benefits of COVID is it has made outdoor dining a more varied and interesting experience in the city, which by and large is a good thing. Where I am is both kind of interested and generally, positively disposed towards the changes. However, I'm still trying to figure out what the problem is. And I'm not convinced by the answers that we got relative to the front of the building versus the side. If the objective of the restaurant is to have a place for outdoor dining that is covered, I didn't hear answers that convinced me that this was the only place they could put it. And so I'm not that I think that this solution doesn't have merit. It does have some merit. I just don't feel comfortable approving this unless we have a much more thorough rendition of why the side is not an option and why this is the only option.
But I would challenge you there, Matt, because what I believe we're charged with is looking at a concept that somebody puts before us and deciding whether we think it's compatible with the historic district, not whether there's something else they could do that might be more compatible, but is this solution that they've put before us compatible?
Right, fair enough. And I would respond to that by saying, one of the measures you can use to judge whether something's compatible is the location of something. And you could say, you know, I would defend that by saying, putting this structure on the side of the building and having a more continuous street frontage in the retail area of Cleveland Park is more compatible with the historic district.
Right, but more compatible is not the test. Is this solution compatible? So what you'd be saying is you don't find this solution compatible.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is Mark Bucher, real quick.
Wait.
This is our deliberation, so
Okay.
you're not able to speak during this time. Sorry.
So my issue is the uninterrupted length. I think what we are looking at here is like perfect. The proportion of covered space, the permeability of umbrellas or some other smaller structure rather than something that's 12 feet by 48 feet, I think works. And I could accept, you know, even two smaller structures that have, you know, say a 5-foot gap between them. I understand that if it's raining, the servers get wet. You know, that's life, and they're going to get wet coming out of the building. You know, this is what happens if you want to use this in the rain. I get that. And this happens all over the world. But I don't think a 60-foot long structure, continuous, unbroken, is compatible. And whether it's a tiny one over the vault and a bigger one at the other end or something, but that's where I come out, is that what's being proposed is not compatible. And I think there are possibilities for making it smaller and breaking it up so that you get more permeability. But right now, I'm not there. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Outerbridge. Others?
I mean, I'll weigh in and simply say that I'm in support. I'm in concurrence with both the chair and board member Beatty.
Okay. Thanks, Andrew. Gretchen, did you have any you wanted to share?
Only to say that I think I align in my views, particularly as Outerbridge mentioned about the consistency of this contributing facade of these contributing buildings along Connecticut Avenue in their facades and the relationship. And as we're seeing it here, it's clear that these are temporary elements. And I know the tent can also be perceived as temporary, maybe not a beautiful aesthetic item, but certainly there are other solutions and other tents, many around the district that we've seen. And I really appreciate everything that the owner has done. However, I think the consistency of these facades and their relationship to the street front as a contributing feature to the historic district is disrupted by this structure. And I think the comments that I made in requesting for it to be lighter or smaller or discontinuous or in pieces as a series of maybe squares or some other dimension, I don't see that represented in what's been proposed.
Okay.
I would also add that I think the building is quite significant. It's not just the ordinary contributing building. It's really interesting, it's varied, and it has a lot of architectural detail that can be appreciated. So it's not just a bland building that's old. It's one that really one likes to look at.
I would amend my comments to align also with Outerbridge and Gretchen in the sense that I think it is a building. The length is a problem for me, and I think the comments that have been made about its relationship to the facade, I agree with.
Okay. Then any motion we make is going to be split here, so we'll need to probably do a roll call to take a vote. But I would support the revised concept as it's been presented today, and adopt the staff's recommendation that we make this clear that it's a test case that we're supporting, and that the board will revisit this once it's installed to then, maybe similar to some of our project reviews, the board has an opportunity to once again weigh in so that we can then speak to this for future cases as to whether or not we think what was decided here was successful or whether it could have been modified in some way to be more successful, so that this is not seen as a precedent-setting decision, but rather a test.
I'd second that.
I was gonna say, if that's a nomination, I second it.
Okay, all right. So any further discussion on that? If not, then I will go down the line based on my screen. The vote for Board Member Beatty.
Aye, in support of the motion.
Okay. Board Member Failer.
Nay.
Okay. Board Member Horsey.
Nay.
Okay. Board Member Auerbach. We can't hear you.
Aye.
Okay. Board Member Bell.
Nay.
All right. And Board Member Jones.
Aye.
All right. And I am in favor. So the motion carries by vote of 4-3 in support of the revised concept as it's been presented today. All right. I'm sure we'll have more discussion around this case and others similar to it in the future. So look forward to continuing that discussion. Thank you, everyone, for your participation today. All right. So our next case is in the Tacoma Park Historic District at 7050 Eastern Avenue. Is staff ready to present?
Yes, we are. You'll remember this case from last month. It's new construction in the Tacoma Park Historic District, replacing a non-contributing building. The board gave general approval to the concept for a 6-story apartment building in this location, but you asked for 2 things. One was further clarification showing the impact of the building as it would be seen or not seen from the Lucinda Cady House, a landmark house located to the north of the site at the end of this block, a landmark property that's up at Piney Branch Road. And you asked for further study of and simplification of the front elevation, finding it a little bit busy and a little bit too fractured, and asking that the applicants look at how that design could be simplified. So the applicants have responded to both. They've prepared some studies that show with greater specificity the extent to which the new building would really not be visible from the Lucinda Cady House. This is the Cady House, as you see here on the right, the subject site down on the left. And then they removed the trees and did a series of drawings that indicate that the property this project will have no impact on visibility as seen from the Cady House. Then the second aspect is they have provided 3 different options for the front facade. Just to remind you, this was the previous version in which the building was, the facade design was sort of stepping down on the left-hand side to relate to the smaller scale buildings, also non-contributing to the historic district on the left, stepping up a little bit on the right. A couple of suggestions were made of looking at maybe getting rid of one of the setbacks on the front facade, maybe simplifying the number of materials. And that's what the applicants have developed with 3 different options. Option 1 is removing all of the options remove one of the setbacks, so that the primary mass of the building is now where the lobby entrance is located is 3 window bays wide as opposed to 2, and the garage entrance element is set back. This option 1A also eliminates the use of the shingles that were on the left-hand side in this image, and just uses the same material for the top 2 floors throughout. Option 1B is that same option, looking at a little bit more of a traditionally supported post-supported front porch. And I think this was in response to the request to study whether some sort of a porch-like element, which is a common feature in Tacoma Park, could be incorporated into this building. And then the third option goes back to the supported canopy and raises the brick on the left-hand side by 1 floor, so that there's it's only the fifth floor that has the use of this the lighter colored material, and the brick portion below is the same 4 floors on both the 2 projected and the projected and the recessed element. So staff believes that all 3 of these are responsive to the desire for a simplified elevation. I think we came out in support of this option 2 as what we thought was the best at simplifying the design of the building. But I think any of them could be found to meet what the board was looking for in terms of simplification. So we're recommending that the board support either option 2 or all 3 options, or whichever you pick, and delegate final construction approval to staff.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Steve. Is the applicant ready to present the changes that you've made? All right, you can proceed.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us back in regards to this project. Steve, if you don't mind going back to the, I guess, not the opening slide, but the second slide. You know, and Steve pretty much covered just about most of what should be pointed out here. But just to refresh the conditions, we have this slide showing the views from the street. And just as a reminder there, that image B is showing to the left the existing structure of the proposed site. And then the image A is showing, of course, the existing view from the street view from the Lucinda Cady house. Next slide. And this, again, just to kind of a refresher to show the conditions and the relationship between the buildings themselves and between them and the street, and the various setbacks. And here we're showing also the 2-foot contour that we got from the official DC database that we used for the following images, 3D sketches that you'll see. Next slide. So this is essentially sort of course, a simplified version of what is actually there. There's, of course, some more detail to the buildings and to the sidewalk. You notice that the Lucinda house is a bit raised and sort of its own mound, as you may be familiar with. But this building, it's, of course, not showing all of the vegetation, but the trees that you see in front of the buildings are meant to sort of at least show the ones that are along the street. So this shows, you know, somewhat of what the existing condition is. And then in the next slide, we kind of remove the trees so that we can be a little bit clearer about what the buildings are doing. And in this image, the building is in the background and is, of course, hidden by, especially by this, the first, the building adjacent to the Lucinda Cady house. And in the next slide, we've sort of ghosted those buildings so that you can get a sense of, you know, so we can see the transparency of what our building shape actually is and how it is, in fact, hidden. Next slide. And then this is putting everything back, and you can see how once you kind of have everything in place, how much of our building, or the entirety of the building, would in fact be hidden. And if you actually did go back to the images, you would see that the trees, there's a lot more trees in the actual photo that that would even cover even more, of course. But we wanted to sort of simplify it and clarify what is really in our view, so that we can make a confident decision. So that is, and by the way, this view was taken from the at a 6-foot level, standing on the street there, to be clear. So that's the first point. The second point, of course, was looking at the facade. In the next slide, and I don't want to spend much time on this one, but of course, some of the comments were that a little bit too much going on with the materiality, articulation, and the almost too much bumping and bays happening. So in the next slide, you see, I think a drastic simplification, I think in a good way. And as Professor Matt Bell would say, we want to simplify and clarify, and I think that's what we've done here. So first of all, you see the front most tripart bay, right? The sort of 3-window, 3-bay massing in the front. It's been simplified, and we also sort of carried this idea of the Juliet balcony sort of look. Not to say that every single one of those will be a Juliet balcony, but we wanted to sort of maintain a consistency and tie that front together. And of course, on the side, we actually removed. We had 2 bricks shown in the previous iteration. The second brick was sort of in between the windows, where now you see this dark gray, which would be a fiber cement panel that we have, that we actually are using all around the building. So it adds some consistency as well to the facade. And then as Steve mentioned, we removed the darker wood material that was sort of meant to imply the wood shingles, or the shingle siding, and that further simplified. I'm not sure if everyone lost the image. But I seem to have
It's
lost
gray
it.
for me.
Yeah.
I lost it.
Yeah.
Could you run through the facade options for us again, please?
Yeah, starting with the original proposed would be great. Can you, I don't know if everything's gray now.
Yeah, maybe
Go out and come in again.
maybe Steve is having some
Yeah.
connection issues, perhaps.
Looks like it.
Hi, this is Juliana speaking. I can share the facade options.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Juliana. Does Steve have to stop sharing first?
Hi, this is Juliana. Are you able to see the screen?
We can't
Yes,
now.
I see.
Thank you. And so
Okay, yes.
this is the
Yeah, so this is the previous proposed facade there. And the 2 first options after that slide are the same. The only change is the canopy versus, that's attached to the facade versus being supported by posts in the second option. And then the third option is the same as option 1A, but the brick on the left side goes up. And the benefit of the first is that you can see that the brick being lower then sort of responds to the adjacent building height. But I think that either option works. So we have no. I think our team's preferred option would be the first, but generally speaking, these are all great options, we think. And that concludes our presentation. We have, if we want to look back at some of the previous presentation images, we have further in the slides, but we'd like to hear your comments and questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions from board members? Questions? Okay.
So I have a quick question on this option on the gray brick on the left-hand setback portion of the building. Did you not take it up the third story? Were you trying to relate to the existing smaller 3-story building by keeping it at the second floor level or whatever? No, I guess that's the third floor level. Sorry. Is that why you kept
That's right.
it down? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, and also to sort of create a little bit of a little bit of more difference between the two masses, sort of the front mass and then the bigger mass. We think it also helps to separate them a little bit more. But that was certainly the other reason.
Right. Thank you.
And Juliana, can you advance to 2, option 2? What goes up? Beyond 1B to the next one. It's almost like option 3, right? Yeah. Okay.
Maybe you could toggle back and forth between option. It'd be useful to see them in quick succession, if you don't mind. Yeah. 2, 1B, 1A. Okay. And what's 1A?
It's just a different awning.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Got it.
Right. Without the diagonal bracing.
Yeah. Go to 2 again. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
And all of this is just finish changes, right? There's no, the footprint of the building remains the same.
Well, it did change. We actually, I guess, if you toggle from the original proposed facade and the first option, you see that the middle bay is bumped out.
Oh, got it.
And we don't want to push
area.
That's right, and we don't want to push the front bay back because then you have less of then the top level is going to be more visible and intrusive into the view.
Makes sense. Okay. I was just wondering if we were losing anything here, but in fact, you're gaining with this solution. Okay. All right. Any other questions from board members? All right. We don't have anyone registered to speak on this case. So if there are no other questions from the board, do want to note that we received a letter from Jeremy Jones that is in the record. And we have the ANC's letter of support. And the reason I asked about what you might have lost is the ANC also notes in their letter that they would oppose any revisions made by the board that would reduce the number of units here. So they are very much in favor of adding more housing and affordable housing with this and other projects coming to the board. All right, then is the board ready to deliberate? All right.
Yes.
Okay. Staff has recommended option 2, and I tend to agree that that is preferable. I know what we talked about at the last hearing was a desire to see this simplified, and that does a better job of simplification to me. So that's my thought. I'm in support of the staff's recommendation.
Yeah, I would agree. Option two, I think, is the recommendation, right?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think this is the superior one. It's a little simpler. It does all the things I think we asked it to do, and the scale of this front piece seems like something I could imagine in Tacoma Park. So
Mhm. Yeah.
And this awning is, I think, preferred to the other awning.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So then I will make a motion that we support the revised concept option 2, including the awning as it's shown in option 2. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? Then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? All right. The motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you all.
So our next application is in the Capitol Hill Historic District at 616 Lexington Place. Northeast, is Moira on?
Hey, this is Steve. No,
Steve.
Moira is not with us today. She is on the other side of the world as we speak. But she's passed this one on to me. This is a concept application for a 2-story rear addition on Lexington Place. And I know that the ANC commissioner is on the line, and we have talked. I don't think that there's any concern about the compatibility of the rear addition that's at question, but rather the commissioner has some concerns about inadequacy of the plans as they relate to the front of the building, the site plan, the staff recommendation is for the board to find the proposed rear addition to be compatible. And I'll let the ANC commissioner speak on his concerns about the rest of the project. And then we can ask the board how they wanted to deliberate and address the concerns that he's raised.
Okay. Did you not share those concerns? Because I saw some of their comments and, on this page, for instance, the note about new entry door per HPRB specs. I don't know what that means. So the drawings are do lack sufficient detail.
Yeah.
See why.
Those are the sorts of things that we as the staff would obviously require before we would sign off on a permit. Since this is a concept application, it's not unusual that sometimes some of those specifications aren't developed yet. But we would ensure that they would meet the board's standards and guidelines as part of the permit review. But and I mentioned to the commissioner that we could share those plans with the ANC prior to doing any staff sign off so that they're assured that they meet the standards. But again, I want to give him the opportunity to share those concerns.
Okay. That sounds good. Is the applicant ready to present?
Chair Heath, this is Juliana speaking. I'm not seeing the applicant on the line.
Okay. All right. Do we have the ANC commissioner?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Then why don't we hear from the ANC commissioner, since they've already heard a presentation on this and have their thoughts. We'd like to hear what they have to say, and the information from staff regarding a process moving forward where they'd be involved and would be able to see how the design progresses and be able to provide input. I'd be curious to hear their thoughts on that.
Madam Chair, members of the board, Mark Eckenweiler, Vice Chair, ANC 6C. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yes.
All right, thank you very much. If you've had an opportunity to review the letter that was submitted into the record for the ANC, I think that covers it. I don't want to, burden your time this morning. And I think Mr. Calcott has fairly summarized what the concern is. I'll just put it a little bit differently. The issue is not what's in the application so much as what's not in the application. And I appreciate what he said about, concept versus permit application. Our experience, well, first of all, we obviously don't get to see these things. If they've already been through concept review, when they go to permitting, we don't see them at all. And our experience is that sometimes there is a little slippage there. And since this is our shot to review this, it's really, really important to us, particularly where we see a lot of inconsistencies. So, vague descriptions, the failure to depict the existing condition, as mentioned in the letter, those front facade windowsills and the shutters are not depicted. And that's kind of the tip of the iceberg. So it raised some significant concerns for us about what else is either improperly shown or, just not shown at all. And we did, as I summarized in our letter, we did try to impress upon the applicant on multiple occasions that we had, specific asks, and this just, didn't get it over the goal line. And I mean, honestly, not even close. There's no plan drawing of that area at the front. Footnote here, you may be aware of this, maybe not. Lexington Place is a little odd as compared with most of Capitol Hill. The property line is not the front facade. It's not even at the edge of the porch. There is a setback, so that area that would normally be public space in front of the front facade is partially on the lot, and then there is some public space between the sidewalk and the lot line. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the commissioner from the board?
No, but this is Board Member Horsey. I'm just looking at these drawings, and the rear deck isn't shown in the section. So I think there is some incompleteness here that's important. And there's no stair. Apparently there's an existing stair at the back, and there's a door on the deck. Yeah, there you go. There's a door. It says entry door, but there's no stair shown on either that elevation or the sections. I don't know if there is a stair or not, but these drawings are incomplete even for concept. So I'm sympathetic to his concerns. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say the same as Outerbridge, that I share the ANC's concerns, and added to note that this poor little street has had several buildings that have been inflicted with this issue with drawings for some reason.
Okay. Believe we also have Beth Purcell back to speak on this application.
Hi, good morning, board members. This is Beth Purcell. I'm testifying on behalf of the Capitol Hill Restoration Society. In our comments on this case, we flagged a lack of information on key points. And we agree with Mr. Eckenweiler, and also hope that the board will direct the staff to review the plans and to satisfy any missing elements in a way that is compatible with the Capitol Hill Historic District. And thank you for considering our comments.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ms. Purcell. Juliana, has the applicant joined yet?
Yes, Chair Heath, the applicant is on.
Okay. All right. Then we'll allow the applicant to make a brief presentation.
Yes, there's not anything that I need to present on at this moment. I believe the architect just once again has failed to provide what you guys want.
Mhm. Okay. Um, all right, then in that case, I think what I would suggest to the board is that rather than deliberating on this, we ask that the applicant come back with more thoroughly detailed drawings that explain existing conditions, what's being modified more clearly for the boards and the ANC's Capitol Hill Restoration Society's benefit before we make a decision on this. Would others agree, or is there a different viewpoint?
Yeah, and I would add for the owner's benefit with their architect too, to ensure that they're really getting what they think they're getting as well. Part of the contractual agreement. Yep.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But Steve, I'm not clear. Had this not had the understandable and important comment from the ANC commissioner, would this have just been approved by staff and not come to the board since there was no opposition?
Well, no, the rear addition is what was submitted for concept review,
Right.
and so
That would come to the board regardless?
that would come to the board,
Okay,
and
good.
typically something like that would be on the consent calendar because it's not particularly controversial. But as long as the applicant is on the phone, I would make the suggestion to them that rather than having their architect draw all of the elevations, preparing plans that have more photographs in them and annotating photographs, since there's not very much change that's being proposed to the front, and that way they could document more clearly the porch columns, the railings, without having to draw them up. If they're going to be retained or if they're going to be replicated, either way, having photographs as part of the plans, I think would be very helpful.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
With specific annotations about clarity of materials. For example, the windows are noted on the front to be wood or aluminum clad wood, but it doesn't say anything about the lights. Are they true divided lights or simulated divided lights?
Right. Yeah, I
Things like
think
that.
moving forward with developing actual specifications for window and door replacement rather than just citing them in a general way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Okay. Thank you to the owner. We look forward to having this come back to us once there are further details provided. And thank you to the ANC and Capitol Hill Restoration Society. Go ahead, Gretchen.
Just one exception to Steve's. I think photographs are a great idea for the elevations. They do need a measurable plan that shows the relationship of how all these things are landing on both the rear yard and in the front porch area in the front yard.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Steve. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. So we've reached the point in our agenda where we would take our break for lunch. We're pretty ahead of schedule. Normally we would take 30 minutes. I don't know, Steve, if you think we could start at 12:30 possibly, rather than 12:45.
Actually, Juliana, do you know if the applicants for the last case are they on the call yet?
They're not currently on the call.
Okay.
Okay. So let's check in at 12:30, and if they're here, we can start. If not, we'll wait until 12:45. We don't have anybody registered to speak
Okay.
on that.
We can reach out to them and ask them to dial in at 12:30.
Okay, perfect. That's
Yeah.
great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you after lunch. Bye-bye. Good afternoon. It's now 12:30 and we're ready to resume our afternoon hearing for today. We just have one that is at 1666 Connecticut Avenue Northwest. I see Anne is on.
Can you all hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Yep.
Afternoon. Nope, you disappeared again. Yeah, you've got to unmute.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yep, now we can.
Sorry, I was having some difficulties on my end. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a project in the DuPont Circle Historic District. To add an enclosure around a long extant sidewalk cafe. The one-story addition would be onto the side of a 7-story office building located at the corner of Connecticut Avenue and R Street. The building itself was constructed in 1962 and is non-contributing to the historic district based on that date. The architects will show you the proposal. It's a glass addition on the R Street side and will be constructed with an aluminum frame, guillotine windows on the side, and a glass roof. The staff does not object to an enclosure here, and we have relied on the board's history of approvals of similar enclosures on non-historic buildings to reach that conclusion. In these cases, the enclosures were approved because they did not impact historic fabric and they did not disrupt the continuity of public space on the major corridor thoroughfare, a major commercial thoroughfare, or where a commercial area turns the corner to meet a residential street. We did make a couple of recommendations that could improve the compatibility of the design. The proposal is calling for the retention of a glass canopy that exists that cants outward from the building and up along the R Street side. And it seems like it would be a little bit confusing with the sloping roof of the addition going down, making a visually busy facade. But I did just discuss this with the architect a few minutes ago when we were talking about the time for the meeting. And he indicated that the tenants in the restaurant would not be allowed to remove this for the entire building. And that is certainly something that is understandable. So otherwise, we have suggested that the number of grid divisions could be reduced to lighten the overall design and increase the transparency through the addition. We have also encouraged the applicant not to cover the door to the restaurant, which is through the wall of the building, mostly because entry into a building is better understood through a facade rather than into a demountable addition. There's also concern that the applicant would expect to have signage on the addition if the door were located here, and I don't think that we would be able to support a permit application for signage on the addition or on blocking up the windows to make the transparency less than what it is proposed. So some consideration might be given to not including the restaurant door within the enclosed space. There was some objection from the DuPont Circle Conservancy, but the staff finds that because the cafe seating has been present at this location for quite some time with a variety of umbrella types and configurations, and given the fact that this is on a non-contributing building on a fairly busy corner, it's an appropriate change that we do support, and is separated, from the residential nature of R Street by the building's garage entry. So we're recommending that the review board approve the project and concept in consideration of the refinements recommended by the staff report and delegate final approval to the HPO subsequent to review by DDOT's Public Space Commission.
Thanks, Anne. Is the applicant ready to present?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear us?
We can, yes.
Hi, everyone. Peter Kozlowski and Stephanie Biddle. We're with Interspect Design, and we are currently working on the applicant. And thank you very much for working with that and working on and presenting that. In short, exactly how Ann was describing this is where we're moving forward. The addition, and I'm trying to control screens, or at least
You can't, you just need to say.
that's okay. In the application, the location of the building is 1666 Connecticut Avenue, which is at the corner of R Street and Connecticut Avenue. The addition, as indicated on the red build outs here on the right hand side element, show where the addition would be. The idea is to do a glass enclosure similar to what Ann has just described to yourself. And one of the other components that are associated with this is because of the conditioning of this space, we have to put a rooftop unit on the top of the building, which would be adjacent to the existing penthouse area. The existing base building penthouse does not have any space in there for any other supplemental cooling systems or any other pieces of equipment. So we would require a small build out immediately adjacent to the penthouse area to accommodate this rooftop unit. And we're actually sizing the rooftop, the enclosure, the screen wall enclosure, to have, if there's additional supplemental components that are necessary, we would be providing that in that room as well, not just for our tenant, but in the future, so that if another tenant needs a supplemental unit, there's already a screen wall that they don't have to necessarily go in front of the boards and everything. We've already taken accommodations for that. In the next elevation, or in the next slide, so next image down. You get it. There we go. Excellent. Thank you. In the next image, on the left-hand side here, you can see the floor plan. The floor plan will accommodate about 57 or about 50 new seats going on there. The glass enclosure does not currently go beyond what the current seating area is as approved by the historic board previously. So what you're seeing in the current enclosure area, the patio area there, where the umbrellas are and the chairs, our enclosure will not go beyond that. In fact, it'll be slightly smaller than that. It will line up with the joints within the concrete as indicated in the picture in the upper right-hand side. As well as in the image on the upper left-hand side, you can see how that joint of the concrete lines up with everything on the R Street side where the residences are. So we're not impacting or growing anything further than what we currently have. The idea is that this will be a temporary structure. In the event that it has to be removed within 24 hours, it can definitely be taken down within 24 hours. It meets all the DDOT requirements and elements of that nature. Lighting within this element would be more pin lighting and ambient lighting, or I'm sorry, more intimate lighting, similar to what you're seeing in the proposed lighting photo that is provided there. Small pendant fixtures, giving you a nice little intimate feel and effect within that space. There won't be a lot of uplighting and things of that nature. Everything is going to be small and nice. The tenant wants to have this be part of a garden style effect and have a lot of intimacy within that effect. There will be a small wood floor located on the lower right-hand side that basically is removable as well. That just helps get people off of the sidewalk, puts a little temporary wood floor in there. But again, everything is removable within 24 hours as requested. The next slide shows the building, the existing building facility, and you'll see where the addition is on the R Street side. We are, as Ann mentioned, under the existing building canopy right now, so we're not impacting or touching the original building, the approved building canopy and exterior curtain wall. That's not what's affected in this project. We're just doing the glass addition, and you can see that on the proposed building elevation and the elevation to the right. And the elevation to the right, you can also see in the upper right-hand side where we're proposing the new screen wall. And that's just that little box basically next to the existing penthouse area up on the roof. The next slide identifies how the guillotine windows will all be basically coming down. So there will always be a privacy window system at the bottom. So those windows are fixed. The two other sets of windows descend, so enabling people to have an open conversation while still having some form of privacy. The idea is they can be exposed to the window or exposed to the weather and have a great time enjoying this environment. The image proposed in the glass canopy on the right-hand side gives you an idea of what the intent is and how we're working on this. and what the idea of what the space is going to be. Glass is also located on the front of the facade and on the back of the facade. So even at the parking garage, there'll be glass there as well. So people can clearly see through this entire addition. That's the intent, to make this as light and transparent as possible. The last image then, following this, basically identifies on the rooftop where we're putting the screen wall and what we're proposing for the screen wall. The screen wall will be on the west side of the existing penthouse as indicated in the sketch. And what we did with the two images below, at the intersection of Connecticut Avenue and Florida Avenue, we did a study, a Google map search, and actually we were able to show, and if you zoom in on that area, you can see the screen wall in that distance. The image to the right, showing the white car there, identifies from our street what the building would look like and where the screen wall would be located at that point. The screen wall, again, meets all the code requirements as far as setbacks. It's about 8 feet high, give or take, and it's located, we try to tuck it away from everything within the facility so that you don't see it on Connecticut Avenue, you don't see it on our street. We try to make it as small and compact as possible on the roof. That is the presentation. That's what we're asking to have reviewed and hopefully be approved by everybody on the call. Are there any questions?
Okay, thank you. Do board members have questions? This feels helpful.
Why is the screen wall so big? I mean, so large, the screened-in area.
So one of the reasons for the screened-in area on the roof is we have a rooftop unit, which is about a 10-ton unit, but in the event that the mechanical system and the mechanical system for the facility is so tight right now that any supplemental units cannot necessarily be fit anywhere within the facility. So the idea would be if we have additional units for additional tenants, if a new tenant comes in and has to modify things, we want to just put a screen wall up there that can accommodate multiple rooftop units or multiple supplemental units that may be required as the building gets changes tenants and becomes occupied.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. Other questions from the board? If you go back to that view, that 3D view of the enclosure, I just had a question about the extent of it. Have you adjusted it so that the entry into the restaurant is not a part of this, or is this still showing the entry as a part of it?
That still shows the entrance as being a part of it. We will adjust it based on the recommendations from Ann and the organization to bring it back a little bit such that the vestibule and the existing entrance to the restaurant will remain. So we will shrink the length of it to accommodate the comments and the concerns brought on by the other board members, by the board and other departments.
Okay, and are you satisfied with the visibility of your signage as it exists today with this proposed solution, or are you going to end up coming back to ask for something?
We're not concerned at this point in time with the signage over the Sete Astoria being located in the canopy, as you can see in the rendering there. I think that's acceptable. And then by us reducing this length of the new addition, we would have the sign basically located on the existing building sign is located there as well. In other words, the main entrance of the restaurant, there says an Sete Astoria there with an open sign as well. So I think signage will be okay. I'm not anticipating us having to come back with additional signage requests.
Okay. Other questions from the board?
So there's no signage as part of this proposal?
Not at this point in time. It is just the addition. The existing signage will remain.
Okay.
And Anne, question for you, since this is a non-contributing building that this is being added to, would you typically evaluate this with more leniency?
In terms of the design, yes,
I'm just wondering if you would have issues with this if it were on a contributing building. Just generally, I know that there are probably a lot of questions about, like, depends on how it's detailed, but just generally an addition like this on a contributing building, would that come under
I
more
think,
scrutiny?
yeah, that's a good question. I think if this were a contributing building, smaller scale, that this would probably be too big. But
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's an enormous building, you know. Well, it's not an enormous building. It's
big.
It's a big building for DC. And I don't think the scale of the addition is inappropriate at all. If it were on a contributing building, we might ask for fewer gridded items. The you know, on the roof itself and on the walls, we generally like to see fewer support posts, just to make it as transparent as possible, because we're usually trying to see through to the historic building and see through along the public space. And I think any sidewalk addition could benefit from that same logic. I don't necessarily find it incompatible the way it's designed, but we would certainly support an exploration into something that had fewer framing elements to it.
Okay, that's fair. Thanks, Anne. Other questions from the board? No other questions.
Can you show the drawing again? I thought the drawing showed the module of the addition to be the same as the module of the building, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, Outer Ridge, you are correct. The spacing of the mullions on the system is correct and lines up with the spacing of the mullions of the existing building, as you can see on the right-hand side of the elevation. So there is a little bit of a discrepancy between the rendering that was quickly done and the actual elevation where we studied. And to go with Anne's comments and elements of this nature, those window spacings are about 5 feet on center. So the concern that we had bringing up of can we make less window or less mullions, less vertical mullions? The idea is yes, but that means to have some type of continuity and contextualism with the building itself, we would be almost at a 10-foot window span. And we were a little concerned about the cost and functionality of that, especially if you can envision people sitting on the window having a 10-foot piece of glass sliding up and down. That was the reason why we said, okay, let's line it up with the mullion system of the building so it looks like there's at least some type of continuity there.
Okay, so this is the correct drawing and rendering is slightly different. So I don't understand how the movable glass works. Can you go through that again?
Sure. If you go to the image next to this, the next slide, please. Okay. So the way it works are the top two, if you were to look at one 5-foot bay, there are 3 windows vertically stacked. The bottom window is a fixed window. The 2 upper windows actually slide down, similar to a double hung window. They slide down and they stack next to the bottom window, which is fixed. That's the guillotine system of windows. So that in the event that it's a nice warm day out and they want to open up the entire system, they can bring the 2 windows down, stack everything at the bottom window, and everything will be nice and clean. In the event that it's kind of hot or they want to get some, it's kind of a misty, rainy day, but they still want to get some air circulation, you can actually take the top window, slide that down so that you have still air circulation in the upper area while still giving protection from the weather and the inclement weather on the second and bottom window.
Got it. Got it. That's interesting. So it's not like a garage door. It's the opposite. It goes down. Right. Okay. Thank you.
Correct. It's in Outer Ridge. We actually have images and brochures and stuff. If you want at a later time, we can send you that information. It's a pretty nice system the way they have it set up.
Right.
Not really our purview, but is the bottom fixed light vision glazing, or is it a spandrel of some kind?
It is vision glazing, but there may be a film. We're not quite sure. At this point in time, we have it as vision glazing. So you have this transparency that's brought on through the entire space. In the event that if there was a request by any individuals to say, hey, I don't like having that, I want to have some type of light film on it or some type of something to give me some privacy from the tabletop down. I'm not sure if we would have to, again, go in front of the board as yourselves to say, hey, it's not really signage, it's just more blinds or something inside. we could look into that and accommodate that. If everybody on the call and everyone in the presentation here has no objection to that.
Did you have a follow-up, Gretchen? Sounds like no. Okay. Okay, thanks. Any final questions from the board? We do have a letter of support from the ANC, but a letter of opposition from the DuPont Circle Conservancy. They voted on this in opposition 5-1. All right. Then are we ready to deliberate on this? All right. Anyone want to start? Camera's on.
I'll start if you like.
Sure.
I don't have any issue with this, especially because it's a non-contributing building. I don't feel like the addition and the placement of it and location detracts from the the character of the historic district. Not so much the relationship to the existing building, because it's not a contributing structure, and it works, I think, with the adjacent historic buildings that are contributing. So I don't have so much of an issue, and I would not have an issue if the fixed light became a spandrel or some kind of opaque glazing system. Might be better for cleaning and, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just reading a letter from the DuPont Circle Conservancy, which I didn't read before, and their concern is the view down R Street, but which I think is a concern, but this isn't very tall, and the row houses, the historic row houses that are further west that this would block some view of, are really quite tall. I mean, they're tall 3 stories, as I recall, and so I don't really think that is an issue. And one good thing is that it'll block the view into the parking garage, which is not attractive at all. So
That's true.
anyway, but I agree with what Gretchen said.
Okay.
I think it might be better to have the spandrel, to have the bottom part not visible so that you don't see a lot of tables and chegs and chairs and all that too. And splash up off the sidewalk on the glass.
Yeah, I would support that. Do you want to make a motion then, Gretchen? Based on your recommendations?
I'll move approval with our additional comment that if the occupants decide to change the fixed light on the bottom to something opaque as a glazing solution, that we would accept it.
All right, I'll second it. Any further discussion? If not, then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? The motion carries. And thank you.
Everybody, thank you very much for your support. This has been great. Thank you very much. We greatly appreciate this.
Sounds good. Thank you. And hope everyone has a good rest of the day and a happy Thanksgiving.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.